Beautiful, and share the screen. Okay, so what we're doing today is we're looking at this book by Bonatti. It's called The 146 Considerations, or The Soul of the Astrologer. Now, William Lilly, who is extremely famous as a horary astrologer, William Lilly is the one who named him, or this book, The Soul of the Astrologer. Of course, this whatever is, he tends to be around for a while too. It totally fucking figures. Anyway, well, hope it's not going to be too difficult. It's not too disturbing. Let me know in the chat if it's super disturbing, and we'll figure out something. Anyway, so he called it The Soul of the Astrologer because he obviously felt that it was one of the most important things that every astrologer should kind of look at. And as I've come back to Western astrology, I do too. I kind of believe it as well, that this is exactly kind of what I need. So what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of go down each consideration. As you can see, this fourth consideration is the causes of things, helping matters so they come to be or are perfected. And so what you're going to find is, as we go through this book and as we go through this issue or this situation, that it's going to say, you know what, this is good for horary, this is good for electional, this is good for revolutions, which are the solar return, or also natal charts. And so this is a way to orient ourselves consistently to the natal chart, or to every kind of chart. But really, specifically, this is also right now your introduction to horary astrology, and into kind of how to work with horary astrology, because of all of these terms that we're learning are essential kind of for how to figure out if what we're looking for is going to happen in horary. So let's kind of go into it. Once again, I'll read it out, and then I'll talk about kind of what it's meaning. So the causes of things, helping matters so that they may come to be and are perfected. So let's just talk about those things. Matters that come to be and are perfected. In horary, there's this whole concept of perfection. And that basically is when you ask a question like, am I pregnant? Okay, if you ask a question like, am I pregnant, to the astrologer, he's going to look at you as the ruler of the first house, and then he's also going to look at the ruler of the fifth house, which represents children and fertility. And in that particular instance, he's going to want to know if there's any form of way that either the ruler of the ascendant connects to the ruler of the fifth, or does the moon, right, who is the co-ruler in all things, if the moon connects to the ruler of the fifth in some kind of way that says, yes, it's going to happen. That's called perfection. That's what perfection is. And so one second, I'm just going to close the window. Of course, he has to start at exactly the moment that I get started. It's a little bit better. Okay, so once again, any question you have, let's say, does he love me? You know, we see a lot of these on Reddit. How does he feel about me? Does he feel the same way I do? Or are we going to get together? Or those kinds of questions. We would then be looking at the ruler of the first and the ruler of the seventh, or the moon and the ruler of the seventh. And if there's any kind of perfection between those. And so that's what this is all about. So in looking at natal charts, what I want to look at instead is what is perfecting, right? Because it's not anything specific, right? In a natal chart, it's just everything's up for grabs. It's whatever it is. In a horary chart, that's when we say, okay, that's doing this to this. We look for that significator, or we look for this significator. But in a natal chart, everything's up for grabs, or is it? And so what I'm starting to think about is, what is perfecting in the natal chart? First of all, what is perfecting in the natal chart, and how do we see those particular types of things? And then the other thing that I'm thinking about is, how do these terms that we're going to learn right now, how do these terms actually create a narrative structure for the chart. And we're going to look at kind of what I mean by that as we kind of go into it. Because one of the things I tend to notice is that everybody says, how do I start? How do I synthesize? How do I put it all together? How do I, that's almost always a question, right? And I feel like these things give us an idea, but we have to look at it in a completely different way, which of course is my specialty. So, okay, so perfected and those which prohibit matters, right? So there are the things that perfect and help matters, and then there are the things that prohibit matters, so that they do not come to be, nor are they perfected. And what are the causes destroying matters after they were perfected? Now, all of this thing about causes and what destroys a matter, what makes a matter, that's all based on this idea of superior bodies that work upon inferior bodies. And so the celestial realm has influence over the earthly realm, especially through the moon's role as mediatrix, which we've talked about before, which is why when we use a horary chart or an electional chart, the moon is always one of the most important things that we talk about or deal with. So let's kind of go into it in just a second. So there are 16 ways. So there come to be in 16 ways, 16 diverse ways in which something can either come to be or be prohibited from happening. So a few of these are going to be, most of you, maybe Crystal and Chris might be the only ones who might not have an idea of some of this stuff that I know. But Crystal, you were in and out, so you may still, and if you've been watching the other videos, then you will be right on top. But some of these we've actually gone through, and one of them is advancement. Right, so we talked about advancement, and it's interesting to know that all of these are based on Arabic terms, or either Arabic or Persian terms, rather, or Farsi terms. And so this one is called advancement or Iqbal. And straight up, advancement just means when a planet is in an angle or succeedent. So once again, when we look at a chart, that should be one of the first things we do, is to see what planets are angular or succeedent. Okay, so that's the very first. That's one of the very first kind of matters, that one of the things that creates matters. There's nothing kind of, we're going to look at a chart in response to it in a second. What we're going to do is we're going to look at these first two, and then we'll go to a chart and see if we can decide which ones we're going to, what charts have what we're looking for. The second is deterioration or worsening, which is called al-Itbar. So we had Iqbal, which is if it's advancing, and then we have retreat, which is Itbar. When we learned about houses, we learned about advancing and retreat. And so we know that retreating houses are the cadent houses. So for those of you who don't remember, the angular houses are 1, 4, 7, and 10. The succeeding houses are 2, 5, 8, and 11. And the cadent houses are 3, 6, 9, and 12. And so the cadent houses were considered weaker houses, or the planets were considered weak in that particular place. Okay, so immediately that's the first thing. Are the planets in the angles or succeeding houses? Are the planets in cadent houses? We're going to look at the first four, and then we'll go to a planet about these first four, because what I'm finding is these first four really are the most important. The next one, is there an al-ittisal, a connection, and which also they use the word conjunctio or conjungo for this word, and that is of any kind of aspect, any kind of Ptolemaic aspect. So it can be the bodily conjunction or the opposition. It can be the square, the trine, the sextile. Any of those four aspects in the conjunction is what happens, but they have to be applying. So is there anybody here that does not know the difference between applying and separating when it comes to aspects? So I think everybody here should be right on it, but please feel free to put it in the chat if you don't, and then we'll go through that. But applying aspects is what they're talking about here. Al-ittisal means an applying aspect. And then the next one is called al-insiraf, which means disregard or separation. So a separating aspect. So the very first things that we're looking for in the chart, right? The very first things, this is consideration number 4. And this is actually the first consideration that's about astrological matters specific to the chart. The others were about knowing whether or not the question is right, more preliminary. This is where we start to get into astrological matters in the book. Once again, this is the causes of things helping matters or prohibiting matters. So the first 4 things we're looking at are, is there advancement in the chart? What's advancing? What is retreating? Which planets are advancing? Which planets are retreating? We know planets are advancing when they are in angles or succeeding houses. We know that planets are retreating when they are in cadent houses. What planets are in itisal, meaning what planets are applying to each other. And we'll talk about that again when we get to the chart section of this. We'll talk about that again. And then what planets are separating from each other. So with that in mind, I want to look at this chart here. So this came in on, let me make it a little bigger. Good. This chart came in on Reddit a few days ago, maybe even yesterday. And what she said, she didn't tell us anything about, she said, does my chart show the deformities that I have? You can see, does my chart say anything about the deformities in my body? She didn't tell us what they were. So, would you all unmute yourselves actually for a second, because I'd like this to be more of a discussion. At this point, we've all been together, and so this is actually kind of for you guys to kind of do this on your own. This becomes now your practice. This is your chart practice. And so what I want you to see, which planets are advancing? Which planets are advancing in this chart? We can say, let's see, it's not, yeah, does anybody want to just go ahead and answer? What do you say? Or why don't I start, and then we're going to have the 5 other charts, and you all can come in when you feel comfortable. But certainly the moon is advancing, right? Because the moon is right on the angles. Remember, the angles are 1, 4, 7, and 10. The succeeding houses are 2, 5, 8, and 11. The cadent houses are 3, 6, 9, and 12. So we know if the planet is in 1 or 2, 4 or 5, 7 or 8, 10 or 11, it's advancing. So that means Jupiter within 5 degrees of the ascendant. Jupiter is, yes. So Jupiter is advancing, the moon is advancing, Saturn's in the 11th, Saturn would be advancing, and then Mars, Mercury is advancing, and this Venus is advancing in this chart. Does that make sense, everybody, from what I'm saying? Right, so if we're looking at advancement, right, we're looking at either angular or succeeding. So here's, in my opinion, kind of the key to looking at this. When we're looking at it, we're also then looking to see what houses those planets rule, because that means that that particular thing is advancing. You understand, that particular that particular area of life is advancing. And look at the planet, look at one of the planets involved here. We've got the 2 of the planets involved are indicative to what she's asking about. Does my chart say anything about the deformities in my body? Where would we look for deformities in the body? Where would we, first of all, what house represents the body? Tell me that. Anybody?
12.
Nope. First house. Excellent, though. Thank you. First house is the house that represents the body. Remember, vitae, corpus, and ganium. So body, life, ingenuity, or skill, or inclination and skill. That's what the first house represents. So we've got a Leo rising. Who is the ruler of the ascendant in this chart? Anyone? So who rules Leo?
Sun.
Thank you. So with the sun ruling Leo, we know that the sun is going to represent the body in this chart specifically. Okay, now the sun is in Libra. Can anybody tell me what kind of sign Libra is for the sun? Is that a good place for the sun? No, it's shitty, right? Because the sun is in the sign of his fall in Libra, right? This is also, remember when we talked about domicile, exaltation, and then the opposite of domicile is detriment. The opposite of exaltation is fall. So the sun rules Leo, is in detriment in Aquarius. The sun is exalted in Aries and is in fall in Libra. So we know that when a planet is in detriment or fall, that it's weakened, right? And this is already the planet that rules the body, the sun. Now, also, the sun is the natural ruler of health and vitality. So even that is another aspect. Now, is the sun advancing or retreating? It's in the third house, which is that an advancing house or retreating house?
Retreating.
Thank you. So the sun is in a retreating house, which means that it's not only is it weak by sign, it's also weak by house placement. Remember, we talked about the two main ways that a planet can be strengthened: through essential dignity, which is by sign, and through accidental dignity, which is by house placement. So that's what these very first two things about advancement and advancement and retreat are really talking about. So they're talking about accidental dignity. How strong is the planet by house placement, which means what areas of life are advanced or pushed forward. So one of the areas of life that's advanced or pushed forward is the 5th house and the 8th house, right? Because Jupiter is the ruler of the 8th. One of the other houses is the 12th house. And then another one, because right, Saturn is here, he's advancing, he gets to kind of advance, is the 6th house. And the 6th house is the house of infirmities and illness. Her question is about deformities in my body, which would be an infirmity of her body. So what we have is we've got actually a grand trine between the ruler of the ascendant. We've got the moon, very angular, and the moon is always co-ruler of everything. And she's also represents the harmony between the body and the soul, or the kind of how comfortable we are in our skin is ruled by the moon. And so how comfortable we could be, either our mental state or our physicality or whatever that means, or whatever that kind of implies, the moon is that thing. And then it's also in this trine to this Saturn. And if you'll notice, the sun is in Libra, which is the exaltation of Saturn, and the moon is in Aquarius, which is the domicile of Saturn. And they're both applying to the trine. So moon is applying to the trine of the sun is applying to the trine of Saturn. And so this is making it very easy for infirmity to affect this person. So what did I ask her? I said, do you have issues in your shoulders or arms or hands or knees or legs, bones, teeth, mouth? She had deformed shoulders, arms, and hands. She had knobby knees. Capricorn rules the knees. So I asked about hands and shoulders because of Gemini. She had deformed shoulders and hands. She had knobby knock knees. She had problems with her legs, which is Aquarius. She had chest pains, which could be the moon. She had a deformed jaw. The mouth is ruled by the sun, but also jaw is bones, right? Saturn is bones and teeth and skin, and she had eczema. Okay, so all of that was right there in the chart, and we can see that in this case, the body is in the weakest position based on what we're talking about, right? We're just talking about advancement and retreat, but we can see that the ruler of the 6th is advancing. The ruler of the body, the 6th of illness, is advancing. The ruler of the body is retreating. And so that can even show the difference between how strong the body is in its ability to either fight off or deal with things that are difficult. But this chart showed a really, really easy, my point about it was this showed how trines can easily facilitate negative outcomes, because that's what's going on in this chart. Okay, so that's an example. Are there any questions about what I've just talked about right now? We're going to go to a few other charts and look at that and try once again the same thing. So once again, I just want to reiterate it, because this I want you all to be able to kind of identify. We're just looking at what is either angular or succedent or cadent, just for right now, and then we'll come back and we'll look at a few of the others about some of the other things. Okay, here's Ramey's world. Can you tell us what planets are advancing in this chart? One, there's a really easy answer, right here. So Jupiter is advancing in this chart, right? Very, very much so. And so is Mercury, right? Jupiter's in the first, Mercury is in the second. We could pretty much say, because Venus is within 5 degrees of the third house and Saturn is right on the cusp of the third, I would say no, those are not advancing. Same thing for this Mars. He's not quite close enough to the cusp of the fourth house, so I'd say these planets are all retreating. The planets that are not retreating are this Jupiter and this Mercury. And that's it, right? We don't really have, we're not looking at the outers, right? Sun and Moon are in the 12th, right? So what houses does Jupiter rule in this chart? Jupiter rules the 6th. And in this chart, the way that this is kind of screwed, she's way up in Canada. So this chart has got the screwy things. Of course, if we wanted to look at it from from a whole sign perspective, some things might change. For instance, this Mars might become angular, right? We looked at this whole sign. All of these might be then considered succeedent, right? Instead of these being considered going into the third house, right? So some things might change, but the things are absolutely without any kind of question are this Jupiter and this Mercury. And Jupiter rules the 10th, Mercury rules the 4th, Jupiter rules the 6th, Mercury rules the 12th. So those, in my opinion, would be houses or areas of life that might be pushed forward or might be brought forward in a person's life or advanced in this particular person's life. Now, using this chart, remember the other thing that we were looking at is where are the applying aspects and where are the separating aspects. So I'm going to go back to our sheet for a second and just reiterate what we have talked about with applying and separating, or just at least to give us a little information. So if you remember, the Chaldean order, or we'll do the opposite. So from fastest to slowest, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, okay? And only faster planets can apply to slower planets. So that's important. And in order for a planet to be applying, it has to be in a lower degree. So the faster planet needs to be in a lower degree than the slower planet. So for instance, let's say the Moon is at 4 degrees of Aries and Venus is at 4 degrees or 8 degrees of Gemini, right? So now we have an applying sextile between the Moon and Venus, right? So write this down so that you know exactly what we're looking at. So when I get to it and start going from chart to chart, you'll be able to go, oh yeah, that's right. If you remember from when we actually talked about this, we talked about who could apply to who, right? So the Moon can apply to everybody. Mercury can apply to everybody but the Moon. Venus can apply to everybody but Mercury and the Moon. Sun can apply to everybody but Moon, Mercury, and Venus. Mars can apply to Jupiter and Saturn. Jupiter can apply to Saturn. Now, I'm not including the outers, but it goes for the outers as well. Obviously, all of these planets can apply to the outers. None of the outers can apply to them, right? Because they're slower. Faster planets always apply to slower planets. In order for the aspect to be applying, it must be a faster planet. For instance, this, a faster planet in a lower longitude of degree in whatever sign it's in aspect to a slower planet. Now, if we have this, Moon at 8 degrees of Aries and Venus at 4, then we have a separating. So here's our applying aspect. And here's our separating aspect. These are the terms. So the terms that he's using is, this is our Idisal, and this is our Insiraf. And so that's his, so the Kanyungi and the what is he calling, the connection and the disregard. Okay, so we're gonna now go back to Ramey's world or whatever and see if we can find connections or disregards. As a matter of fact, actually what we should maybe do is let's go back to that original chart we were looking at. Does my chart say anything about my deformity? This is not a very good one though, because it doesn't have numbers. I'd rather have numbers so we don't have to go back to a table. Okay, so once again, let's actually break the chart down. So fastest to slowest, here's the Moon, fastest, then Mercury, then Venus, then Sun, then Mars, then Jupiter, then Saturn. And then we have all the other outers as well. Where's that Pluto there? So we have all the other outers as well that can be applied to. So what's the lowest number? Oh, first of all, also, do you remember how we find out who's in aspecting who? If you remember, every sign aspects the sign 3, 4, and 5, and away from it, and 11, 10, and 9 away from it. Okay, so for Cancer rising, Virgo, Libra, and Scorpio are aspected. Right? Anything in those anything, if there are planets in Cancer, they can aspect any signs in Virgo, Libra, or any planets rather Virgo, Libra, or Scorpio, and any planets in Pisces, Aries, Taurus, Aries, or Pisces, right? And then obviously they can also apply to anything opposing them in Capricorn, and anything also in bodily conjunction. And in this case, this is the first one. This is our first connection, the Moon and the Sun, because the Moon is faster than the Sun. The Moon is at 12 degrees and 30 minutes. The Sun is at 12 degrees and 58 minutes. So this is, we call this kind of conjunction or this kind of aspect that's almost exact, that's in the exact same degree, that is called partile. Partile. This is a partile conjunction. Also, this means that the person was born on the new moon, right? So there's got the triple. This happens once a month. This triple threat thing that happens as ascendant, Sun, Moon, all the same sign. That usually happens once a month at sunset. So this person was born at sunset. All right, so that's our first one. Sun to Moon. Let's see, what else can we have going on? So we've got Venus at 22. We've got Saturn at 27, Leo. That's another one. Oh, we got a question. Oh, okay. Well, Crystal, Crystal says that she's having problems hearing me and she's having some phone problems. This is definitely recorded. If anybody's having another problem hearing me, please let me know. But this is definitely being recorded. So, do it, whatever you need to do. And this is going to be available. I'm going to be making this available very soon after anyway. And I'm making it available for the people in the study as well. So you'll definitely have a chance to deal with it. Okay, so the first idisal or connection is Moon, Sun. The second one is Venus, right? Venus is fast, Saturn is slow. Then let's see, is there anything going on? But does Jupiter receiving any aspect? He could receive an aspect from Mars, and sure enough, he is. So we've got three of them. We've got Mars to Jupiter. That's an idisol. We've got Venus to Saturn. That's an idisol. These are all applying aspects. And we have Moon to Sun. So this is actually quite interesting. The closest, of course, is this Moon Sun. So that means something going on with the ruler of the ascendant and the ruler of the second house. But what do we know about when a planet is in close connection to the sun? That planet is combusted by the sun. And so we could also say, now this planet hasn't quite reached what they call Cazimi, right? So remember, there's the three aspects of combustion. The first is under the rays, which is like from 17 degrees away from the planet to 8.5. Then from 8.5 until like 17 minutes into the sun, that's what we call deep combustion. And then from 17 minutes to exact, that's called Cazimi. And that's supposed to give the planet being combusted like supernatural ability or incredible power, which I believe remains to be seen. And in this case, the moon is moving towards Cazimi, but not there. So it's really super combusted. So that means, remember, the first house represents the head and the mind and our inclination. So this person is probably thinking a lot about money all the time, right? Or thinking often about money because the ruler of the ascendant is with the ruler of the second, right? And then also, there might be issues where money is an aspect of relationships for this person because Venus is the goddess of love. She's in the house of the second, she's in the sign, even though we've mentioned that we put them in the third, but it's still going to have kind of the second and the third are going to have, so this person might do short journeys for money because the second and the third are the same. And then also we've got Venus and Saturn there, and look at how the Saturn is the ruler of the seventh house of marriage. So there could also be financial issues that are connected to the relationships and love as well in this. And so that's how we do it. That's how, so when people are wondering, oh, hey, how do you get kind of into it? Well, the first thing you do is look and see, well, what's angular? And what's angular and what isn't it? What's angular and what isn't? Or what's advancing, what's retreating? And here's the interesting thing about this, with Jupiter on the ascendant here, Jupiter is the natural significator for wealth. So this person may already be quite interested in wealth and in creating a fortune, and there may already be an emotional preoccupation with finances and money, right? Because both the ruler of the ascendant and the ruler of the second house are in Cancer. So, and then also this person may be into luxuries and things that are beautiful and luxurious because Venus rules nice things. The sun rules luxury. Venus rules things that are sumptuous and gorgeous. Although with Saturn, that could also kind of mean that they're a little bit more practical, or Saturn is things that are old. They might have a retro kind of style that they're into. So that's kind of how I'm doing things. The Jupiter here is obviously, like I said, the ruler of the 10th, which is their work and career life. So this person might be quite preoccupied with their life, with their work and career. That may be what things kind of come down to for them, and what is really important. If you remember when we talked about personal happiness and the chart, or personal happiness and the ascendant, then we talked about that in relation to where we see the ruler of the ascendant, etc., or the things that are in the first house. And so the ruler of the 10th being in the first house can be very similar to having the ruler of the ascendant in the 10th. Make sense? Ruler of the ascendant's in the 10th, and by house, the ruler of the ascendant is determined towards 10th house matters. Ruler of the 10th in the first, it's going to be almost the same, or it's going to be very similar. Okay, let's go on to the next chart. And look at that. Here's REM sense. Okay, So if you feel like it, you can either write into the chat or you can unmute yourself and you can, you can talk. I can see that people are feeling a little bit like, oh, maybe I don't want to talk, maybe I do. Some people feel more confident than others, but this is your time. This is essentially your time to kind of try to figure things out, try to see what the things that we're talking about. We're just so far looking at those first 4 considerations. Okay, so what's angular? 1, 4, 7, 10. What's succeedent? 2, 5, 8, 10, 11, right? So first, let's figure that out. So the first thing we've got, what's another one? Jupiter in the first house. Jupiter, Mars is advancing. Venus, Moon is advancing, right? These guys are advancing. So that's an interesting thing. These 2 are advancing. So remember my whole thing about kind of outer planets is if they're exact conjunction or opposition, or if they're right on an angle, which these are, then I kind of will give them a little bit of a thing. And then also the Saturn is advancing. So if just based on this, we wanted to get an idea of what we thought was prominent in the person's life, we would know that the 3rd house, maybe this person has a brother or sister, Jupiter's ruler of the 3rd. Also, Mars is the natural ruler of brothers. This person could have a very important relationship with a brother. So that's the very first thing that kind of comes to me when I see this, when I see both of these planets in the first, Jupiter as ruler of the 3rd once again, and then Mars as the natural significator for brothers. Then the next thing I see is that Jupiter also rules the 6th. To have the ruler of the 6th house in the 1st can be an infirmity. So it can be an infirmity in the feet. It can be an infirmity with the lower back or kidney, in that lower back or kidney region. And look how, as a result, do you remember? Okay, so actually, this is going to be one of the considerations we're going to get to in a second. And I think what we'll do is we'll look at these 2 charts, we'll go on to some more considerations, and then we'll look at the other 2 charts, we'll go on to some other considerations. We'll just kind of we'll kind of go around. But one of the things that, like I said, is it's important. One of the considerations about what either impedes a planet or strengthens a planet is if a planet is conjunct, square, or opposition to a malefic, it impedes the planet. If it's conjunct, trine, or sextile, a benefic, it benefits the planet. So Mars is being benefited, and Jupiter is being fucked over. So Jupiter is being impeded, Mars is being benefited. Jupiter is the ruler of the 6th, so there could have been an accident that's affected, right? Because 6th house is also bad fortune and accidents and difficulties. So there could be accident or job or labor-oriented kind of injury, but there might be some kind of injury, and it may be this lumbar region, lower back, pelvis. It could be that region. It could also be feet, since Jupiter rules since Pisces rules the feet. So that's the first. So even without anything else, just without nothing else, we know that what's advancing is this Jupiter Mars and is it Idisal or Insaraf? Is it applying or is it separating? Mars is faster than Jupiter. Mars is at a higher longitude of degree than Jupiter. Jupiter is at 17, Mars is at 21. Therefore, this is a separating conjunction, right? And so this connection is a disregard. We have disregard between Mars and Jupiter, which is kind of good for Jupiter because that means the worst is over. Not so good for Mars because that means all the benefit is in the past. Get it? Now, same thing here. We've got another conjunction. Look, we have another. These charts are so interesting. I did them. I totally chose them arbitrarily, and they all end up having kind of a little bit of something in common. This Venus, a conjunction with Venus and Leo, and in the 3rd decanate even. Okay, so Venus is at 20 degrees of Leo. Moon is at 21 degrees of Leo. Moon is faster than Venus. Moon is at a higher degree than Venus. This means that this is also separation or disregard. So there's disregard between Jupiter and Mars. There's disregard between Venus and the Moon. But Venus and the Moon are advancing. Venus rules the 1st house. Moon rules the 10th house. So once again, we've got, and also remember Jupiter is the exaltation ruler of the 10th. So once again, we've got some kind of, and also the 11th house is good spirit, so there should be some kind of way in which maybe other people are helping this person to move forward in life, or or friends, especially female friends, right? Because these are female planets. So that's because this is the 11th house, but it's also an advancing house. So Jupiter and Mars are advancing, Venus and the Moon are advancing. I'm not going to go into these for the moment, but I forgot something. Venus and the Moon are advancing, but so is Saturn. And Venus and the Moon are faster than Saturn, and they are at lower degrees than Saturn, which means that there is an ittisal, or a connection between Venus, the Moon, and Saturn by opposition. So that all of a sudden gives us a very different idea of what's going on, of what might be going on, right? So we know that we've got an ittisal by opposition, and that's not always very good, right? And Venus and Saturn, that's not always very good for the love life, right? Because Saturn is cold and dry, and so Saturn can cool her ardor down, or he can corrupt it, right? Saturn is known as corruptor. So we've got this Venus Moon ittisal with the Saturn, or connection with Saturn, or connection meaning applying. Then we also have this connection between Venus, Moon, and Mars, right? Because he's at 2115, the Moon's at 2113, another partile aspect. So it's a partile sextile, and then Venus is also aspecting, also applying to the aspect. So our ittisals are, or our connections are, Moon, Venus, Mars, and Moon, Venus, Saturn. And then obviously Mars, Saturn by trine. So Moon, Venus, Mars by sextile, Mars, Saturn by trine, Moon, Venus, Saturn by opposition. Okay, so that's what we're looking for. We've already seen the separating, disregarding ones, right? Jupiter, Mars, Venus, Moon, they're disregarding each other. But both Venus and Moon are moving to Mars. Mars is moving to Saturn, and both Venus and Mars are moving to Saturn. Okay, so let's go back to the sheet and look at the next 2 or 3 considerations. So here we get into real, excuse me, here is where we start to get into real kind of horary-oriented astrology. And we learned this thing called transfer, or something that's otherwise called translation of light. And I wonder, did I make my own? No, I didn't. Okay. So transfer or translation of light is when 3 planets are involved. And actually, I'm going to go back to this chart because I can show it to you via this chart. So there is an applying sextile between Venus and Mars. But a faster planet is going between those two and is translating the light from Venus to Mars. Moon is going to get to Mars first, but as a result, the Moon is going to translate the light of Venus to Mars. So instead of Venus just pushing her light onto Mars, she's actually getting help from the Moon to translate. So what this could say is, Venus is the ruler of the 1st house in this chart. Mars is the ruler of the 7th house. Moon is the ruler of the 10th house. This person could meet their married partner via their work life. Why? Because this 3rd planet comes in and helps it happen. And so translation is one of the main things that we're always looking for. And it almost always involves a third party, right? Because it's three things here. So REM Sense will hopefully see this and will be able to get some kind of support from it or not. But once again, Venus rules the 1st, which is REM Sense. The 7th is Mars rules the 7th, which is whoever they're marrying or getting connected to. The 10th house is not just, mind you, not just the career or work, but it's also the mother. They could have been introduced to their significant other via their mother, or via their work life. That's how transfer works, right? So that's the next one we've moved to. Number 5 is transfer, or what we refer to as translation of light. Before I go on, does anybody have any questions about what I just said, what I just talked about? Because I know that that can be, we're going to look at all of it, because the thing is, this is what we're supposed to be looking at based on Bonatti, right? The first thing he said is it angular or succeeding? The second thing he said is it cadent? The third thing he said is there a connection? Is there an applying aspect? The fourth thing he said is what's separating? The fifth thing he says is where are the transfers? Are there any transfers in this chart? And transfer is called Natal. Natal. So where are the transfers? Are there any transfers? So we're going to go back to some of these charts and see if we can find transfers. And then the next thing we're going to look at is this thing called collection. Now, I don't know if I have a good, I think I have an example of collection in one of the 5 charts. But basically collection is if you have, let's see, the moon is at 3 Aquarius. Mars is at 6 Gemini. Oh, wait, no, let's do it this way. The moon's at 23 Aquarius. Mars is at 18 Gemini. So she's already left Mars. Jupiter is at 21, right? She's already left it. So these are things that the moon has already left, 21 Gemini. But Saturn is at 26 Leo. So what's going to happen is, remember, so basically what happens is when the moon attaches itself to a planet. So let's say I'm the moon. I'm the moon, and it's my brand new, I've just started out in Aquarius. Here I am at 0 Aquarius. And remember, we've talked about what are the signs that I can aspect. As in Aquarius, I can aspect Sagittarius, Capricorn, Sagittarius, Scorpio, and Libra. I can aspect Aries, Taurus, and Gemini. And let's say there are planets, and sure enough, there's planets in Gemini, and there's a planet, and then obviously a planet in Leo. So there's planets here in Gemini, there's planets in Leo, and as I move, let's say, once again, as I move, when I get to 18, I trine Mars, and I take his light with me. When I get to 21, I trine Jupiter, and I take his light with me. I, the moon, am holding the light of these 2 planets. And actually, as I take the light from Mars, I give it to Jupiter. That's the transfer we were just talking about, right? So here I am, the moon, I get to 18, I take on Mars's anger or whatever or I take on his abusive speech, right? Mars and Gemini can be abusive speech, right? And then I move to Gemini and I move that abusive speech to Jupiter, and Jupiter rules the 9th house of the law, which makes me a really good lawyer. And then at the very end, I come to the opposition of Saturn and Leo, and I transfer all of that light to him. Saturn collects that light. So that's what collection is. When everything is said and done, there's more than one aspect that happens, and there's one planet at the very end that gets all of the light from everybody, and that's Saturn. In this particular instance. So we're going to look for these 2 things in charts as well. Let's see what the next one is. Oh yeah, so these are all of this is horary. All of this is stuff that we use in horary still to this day. And that's kind of why I'm saying, this is kind of on some level your introduction to learning horary. Because, hey, this is what we're looking for. We're looking for all of these things, because once again, now think about the example I gave you at the very beginning of this class. And let's go back to the very beginning of this page. So think about the example I gave you. Am I pregnant? Remember I asked that, that's a question I've got. Am I pregnant? So if, once again, we know what the significators are. The significators are the 1st house for the person asking the question, and the 5th house for fertility and children. So are either the first and the moon are either the moon or the ruler of the first or the ruler of the fifth advancing, are they retreating? That's going to say two different things. If the ruler of the first is retreating, like we saw with that other chart, and the ruler of the fifth is advancing, that might be a good thing. You know, but vice versa, it might not be such a good thing. Or if they're both in retreat, let's say they're both trining between the third and the ninth, or the third and the sixth, or something like that, or the third and the seventh, or they're squaring between the third and the sixth, that's not so great, right? That they're not really positionally all that strong. And if they're in square, we already know that square can be a challenging aspect, right? So all of a sudden, so we can start kind of inferring narrative from a lot of these things. Excuse me. The next thing is there a connection? Obviously, if there's no connection between the ruler of the first and the ruler of the fifth, no applying aspect, or the moon and the ruler of the fifth, then we're going to say no. This is one of the most important. If there's no connection between the significators we're asking about, then there's not going to be it's not going to come to be. And if it's separating, it's not going to come to be either, right? Because it's disregarded. That's already happened in the past. That's when we look at it from a horary standpoint completely. Now, we know from what I say about natal that anything can be made to work in the natal chart, right? Anything can be made on the personal level. Anything can be made to the natal chart. So also then what we can infer from the natal chart is that there are certain things that are perfecting in the natal chart. They may not necessarily be the things we want, but certain things are perfecting. Like in that person's chart, the things that were perfecting were illness and the body, right? In that very first chart we looked at. And as a result, that person had various deformities. And they were all Saturnian deformities, and both of the planets that were being affected by Saturn were in signs where he had dignity. That's when we start being able to kind of look and see what's going on. So what would be connected? Is there a connection between the significators, the ruler of the first or the moon, and the ruler of the fifth? Is there a disregard between them? If it's disregarded, it ain't going to happen. And then, is there a transfer? Does the moon transfer the light between the ruler of the first and the ruler of the fifth? That would make it happen. And then the last is, does the ruler of the fifth collect the light? Does it collect the light? Does it collect the light from everybody else so that it could possibly happen? So this is what it means by causes of perfection, or causes of things that actually happen, or causes of things that are prohibited. This is where the nitty-gritty of that comes down. So let's look at some, or do we want to go further? Let's just look at these two for a second: collection and transfer. Because we've got a transfer. We already talked about transfer here, right? So if you remember from this one, the transfer is happening between the moon, Venus, and Mars. The moon is transferring the light between Venus and Mars. Now, this chart does not have a collection. Okay, it does not have a collection, but we've already looked to see which planets are advancing, which planets are retreating, which planets are in connection, which planets are in disregard, and then which planets are in transfer. So just to get all of that again, Jupiter and Mars, Venus and the moon are advancing, as is Saturn. Jupiter and Mars, Venus and the moon are in disregard. Jupiter and Mars are in disregard because they are separating. Venus and Mars are in disregard because they are separating. Venus and Mars are connecting. The moon and Mars are connecting. Mars and Saturn are connecting. Jupiter and Saturn, I didn't mention that one before, but Jupiter is also applying to Saturn. And so there's a connection. So those are the disregards and the connections. And then now believe it or not, there's two of them. Between Venus and Mars, the moon is transferring the light. And then between Jupiter and Saturn, Mars is. right? Because Mars is at 21, he will get to 25 before he's faster than Jupiter. He will get to Saturn. He's already holding Jupiter's light, and he will transfer it to Saturn. So this is a perfect chart for an example of Natal or transfer, or what we know as translation of light. Let's look at that other chart where we were looking at there. Okay. Oh no, that's why I don't want to use that chart, because give me 1 second. I don't want to use that chart because it didn't have any numbers on the thing, and I'd rather it just be easy. New share. Okay, this is Moonflower. Now we'll just do it all cumulatively, right? We'll just do it all cumulatively. We should be able to do it relatively quickly. So what's advancing? Saturn is within 5 degrees of the 7th house, so we can say it is. It's 9 degrees. 9 degrees, a little bit far for Jupiter, but Mars is definitely. So Mars and Saturn. So right now, Mars, Venus, and Saturn. That's what it looks like. Mars, Venus, Saturn are advancing. What are the planets that are retreating? Mercury, Sun, Jupiter, and Moon. Right? So all the other planets are retreating. So the main ones that are way up there that are advancing their own agendas are the ruler of the 10th, the ruler of the 7th, and Venus, who's the goddess of love. Okay, where are the connections? Where are the aspects that are applying? Well, Mars and Saturn. Mars is at 20 degrees of Aries, applying to Saturn at 23 degrees of Capricorn. Okay, so we've got that going. So we've got one connection right here. Okay, and then let's see what else we've got. Mercury is faster than the Sun. It's at 3. Sun is at 7. So Mercury is applying. So that's a connection. We've got an insiraf between, we've got basically a disregard between Mars and Jupiter, because Mars is faster than Jupiter and he's at a higher degree. And then let's see. Then we've got a few here. So we've got Moon applying to the square of Mercury and Sun and the trine of Venus. So all of our connections or applying aspects are Moon to Venus, Moon to Mercury, Sun, Mars to Saturn, and Mercury to Sun. Now, of course, Mercury to Sun means what? Mercury is combusted. All right. So now, what are we looking for? Are there any? Oh, and then we know our insirafs or our disregard is between Mars and Jupiter. Right. That's pretty much the only one, which is kind of rare. Which you don't really see that. You often see. You tend to see a majority of separating aspects and a few ones that are applying. In this particular case, almost all the aspects are applying and only one aspect is separating. So that means that the houses or the areas of life that are, like I said, that are kind of moving forward in this chart are 7th house and 10th house, but there's also a square between them. So the Aries is the fall of Saturn. So there's problems and contentions and difficulties and challenges, and maybe this person and if there's a partnership, if this person works in a partnership, there will be contentions and angers and possibly lawsuits. But we can see that, especially with Mars as the ruler of the 10th and Mars is exalted in Capricorn, that there might be a lot of energy towards work. There could also maybe be some workaholism, but it could also mean work environments that aren't so enjoyable. That's another thing that I might wonder about. So when Moonflower, I do know that Moonflower was on our little call that we talked about it. So I know they're going to want to know about it and they'll get back to us. So there's that. Then there's this Venus in the 11th. And then there's this Moon with Venus, Moon with Mercury and Saturn, etc. Venus is the ruler of what? She rules the 11th, right? So more than likely, I'm going to say literary friends. It's probably a little bit of but she'll probably would have very social friends, maybe friends who write, friends who are teachers, and probably mostly female. And then Venus also rules the 4th house. So she might even live with friends. She might even live with, live with female friends as well, or something like that. Okay, so that's how we can do something like that. I'm not going to get into what the moon Venus might mean and all of that stuff, but we do know, remember, Venus's relationships in the 7th house is 2, so this person will be probably relatively relationship oriented, but the Gemini makes intimacy a little bit challenging. Is there a transfer? Is there a collection? So, oh, I missed one. Jupiter is applying to the opposition of Saturn. So what could happen? What could be a collection is this. If Mercury, let's say Mercury were here instead of Mars. Let's say it was Sun, Mars here, and Mercury was here. And Mercury was at 20 degrees Aries, and the very last thing he was going to do was square the Saturn, and he had already, remember, this is Mars here. He had already squared Mars. He had already squared the Sun. He had already squared the Jupiter, right? He had already sextiled the Venus. And the very last thing he was going to do was square the Saturn. That would have been collection in this chart. But this, so that would be collection. There really isn't any translation. Oh, yes, there is. The moon is translating Mercury to Venus. Right? Because he's approaching Mercury, and at some point, she rather is approaching Mercury, and then after she leaves Mercury, she's going to translate Mercury's light to Venus. So it hasn't started yet. She's about to enter into what we call the transfer, right? So that's an example of what we're talking about with this chart. Let's get the next one. Killer Queen Kiki. Killer Queen Kiki. Okay, so see, we can just run this down. We can just kind of run these down. That's what's so good about it. And that's what you want. That's what you're going to want. You're going to want to get to a point where this is just kind of a natural. I mean, it's become natural for me after learning this now, being like, oh, this is what I'm doing. This is how I'm looking. So what's advancing? First thing I see, this Jupiter Mars advancing, this Sun Saturn advancing, Mercury is advancing. Okay, so Jupiter Mars. Oh, here's it. Someone's got a chat. Yeah, very good, Diana. Mars, Jupiter, Pluto. For now, we're not actually Pluto. No. For now, we're not going to use the yeah, Mercury. Very good, excellent. For now, we're not going to use the outers, and we'll only use them when we see them right on the angles. When we see them, and then I don't really use them that much anyway, but still. Okay, so we know right now exactly correct, Diana. So the Sun, Saturn, the Mercury, the Mars, Jupiter. Those are the things that are coming forward. We also know that there's an applying aspect between the Sun and Saturn, right? Because Sun is faster and he's at a lower degree. And there's an applying aspect, well, it's a little bit too wide. So really what's going on here, oh, guess what? We've kind of got a collection here. Because look at where Jupiter is. He's at 14. We're going to have a very small collection. The moon is at 8. Well, no, we can't use the moon. It's going to have to be this one. The Sun is going to be doing, it's going to be a collection, but the Sun will translate. So the Sun is going to go, Sun has already left Mars, right? The square of Mars. The Sun is moving to the conjunction of Saturn. And then the very last thing the Sun is going to do is square the Jupiter. So that means that Jupiter is collecting the light, right? He's collecting Mars's light and Saturn's light from the Sun. So it's a little bit different from translation where but actually what's different is that actually the Sun is translating the light between Mars and Saturn, and then Jupiter will finally collect at the end. That's what's happening. So the transfer is between Mars and Saturn that the Sun is facilitating. And the jam, or the collection, is Jupiter at the very end of that. So Jupiter will collect Mars and Saturn. Sun is translating Mars to Saturn. And let's see, and so for instance, there's a disregard between Jupiter and Mercury. There's a disregard between Mars and the Sun and Saturn. And there is a disregard between Jupiter and Saturn, right? So really the applying aspects are Moon to Jupiter, Sun to Saturn, and Jupiter. Okay, yeah, so those are the main ones. So if we look at by house, Saturn is the ruler of the ninth, the 10th, ninth and the 10th in this chart, making the Sun the ruler of the 4th. Mars is ruler of the 12th. That's not so great. Jupiter is ruler of the 11th. So we got the ruler of the 12th and the 11th next to each other, or we're in the same sign. So more kind of interesting stuff to look at. This is how we do it. This is how we do it. Let's look at the very last one, and then we'll go on to the next ones. I see this is going to take more than one. I thought maybe I'd be able to get through this a little faster, but I can see this is going to be more than one. It'll be more than one part. Okay. So what's advancing? And what is, okay, I see something advancing right now, right? This. Jupiter, Mars. See, once again, Jupiter, Mars. You've seen a lot of stuff in Pisces, stuff in Gemini. Another Saturn close to the, not in the, close to the 7th, not in the 7th, but relatively close to the 7th. Another Cancer rising chart. Okay, so Jupiter, Mars, and Moon. And then I would say more Mercury, not the Venus Sun. So the Venus Sun would be retreating. The Saturn would be retreating. The Mercury, the Jupiter, the Mars, the Moon would be advancing. Now, remember, I'm using the 5-degree rule for each cusp. So if a planet is within 5 degrees of a cusp, it goes into that house. And so that's why Venus in this case for me is considered cadent or retreating. What are the connections? The connections are, we'll look at that. The moon has moved on. Actually, we've got a very, here, we're going to have a collection. The Sun is going to collect. He's going to collect the light of Jupiter, Mars, Mercury, and Venus. When the moon gets to 22 degrees of Gemini and squares the Sun will collect. But right now, the Sun is translating the light of Mars and Jupiter to Mercury. Moon is at 2, Mercury is at 3. Moon and Jupiter are at 0. So there is a translation and there is a prospective collection. So let's see. So once again, remember, what is it? What are we looking at? What are we considering? We're considering what is it in the chart that makes things happen or prohibits things from happening. And so the Sun, in this case, is the ruler of the second. If somebody asked me, am I going to get will this be a good investment for me, or am I going to be wealthy? And I could ultimately say, there's a good example, not example, but there's a good possibility that things will be necessarily very bad, because you've got all of these influences that are going to be coming back and finally connecting to the Sun, who's the ruler of the second house. So I can actually say, oh, maybe you might be wealthy. Not wealthy, but maybe you might do well, relatively well financially, or you might find that there are many different avenues through which you've come to money, right? Because we've got all of these different planets, the Jupiter, the Mars, the Mercury, the Venus. All of that stuff is being translated to the Sun, who will collect all of that light, right? And so that's how, if indeed the person will do well financially, it's through this collection. And what do? When we collect money, to send it to collection. So maybe that means that this person has lots of tenants. Venus is ruler of the 4th. So this person could have lots of tenants and they collect rent from them. or something like that. I mean, that's a far-fetched one, but that's kind of a way of looking at how collection, in case you're feeling kind of like, what are we talking about? Or what is collection again? That's how collection can bring things to pass, right? Translation, we've already talked about, right? If when we saw the ruler of the first and the ruler of the seventh and the moon, you know, that, and the moon was the ruler of the 10th, and I said, oh, the mother could introduce you to your husband to be or wife to be. Right? But through collection, it's all of this stuff comes to me. And that's how it comes to me. Okay, let's go back to the sheet and look at the next ones. Okay, so we looked at transfer of light called al-naql. We looked at the collection or aggregation, which is called al-jam. Okay, so the next is prohibition. So now we're getting into how things get screwed over. Now, and I did actually write out a little thing about this. So barring or prohibition happens in two ways. It can happen by bodily conjunction or by conjunction and aspect. And so what happens is if, let's say you've got the moon, oh no, let's say it's Venus. Venus is at 8 Gemini. Mars is at 12 Gemini. This is the first one, so by conjunction. And Jupiter is at 14 or 13 Gemini. So, yeah. So Venus is the faster planet, so she should be getting there, right? But before she can get there, Mars will go exact. Right? So she's got 5 degrees to go. Mars only has 1 degree. So before she's able to perfect with Jupiter, Mars is going to perfect, which means he prohibits her from perfecting. Now, what if Venus were the ruler of the first and Jupiter were ruler of the fifth? And we were asking that question, am I going to have a baby? Am I pregnant? Right? Or yeah, or if, I mean, Jupiter can't be the ruler of the seventh if Venus is the ruler of the first. But, you know, if the chart's kind of off, it could work out that Jupiter is the ruler of the fifth. So with this, the Mars would prohibit that from happening. It would prohibit Venus from perfecting with that. Okay, now we could also do it if Venus, same thing, Venus is at 8 Gemini, Mars at 12 Gemini, and Jupiter at 14 Pisces, right? Or 13 Pisces. So it doesn't have to be. So basically, or actually, yeah, or here, Mars at, let's do it that way. So she's going to the square of Jupiter, but before she can, Mars goes right in and conjunction. And so that's how prohibition can happen. Now, this is something you see less, and it can be more difficult to see. It can be more difficult to find. Like we've looked at, it can be more difficult to find, and there might not be any in some of these, or we'll come back and we'll look for them. But we'll kind of come back to any questions about that one, because I know that's a little bit. All of this, I'm sure, is quite new to everyone, and so I just want to be sure that you're feeling kind of comfortable with the new terminology. But once again, prohibition is when you have a fast planet. You have 3 planets: a fast planet, a planet that's not quite so fast, and then the slowest planet. But the planet in the middle is the closest and gets there before the faster planet does. And the planet in the middle prohibits the faster planet from getting there and perfecting. And if the fast planet and the slow planet are the things that you're asking about, then that means you don't get the thing you're asking about. So 8th is called reception. Okay, so that's this. When we come into this reception thing, then we get into a bigger. Let's switch for a second. Let's kind of go. Even though that's number 8, that really needs to be connected to another section where we look at pushing. Okay, so And then the ninth is void of course, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with or have heard of. So voiding of course is when a planet is not going to receive any other aspects where it is. So for instance, let's say the moon is at 25 Leo. And, or really, we could even say this. The moon's at 18 Leo. And let's say Mercury is at 4 Gemini, Venus at 8 Libra, Mars at 3, at 3 Cancer. Everybody is basically behind her, right? Sun 6 Aries, Mars, we already did Mars, Jupiter, everybody is behind her. Everybody's finished. Jupiter at 9 Taurus and Saturn at 11 Aries. Okay, so at this point, all 7 planets, all of the other 6 planets are behind her. She's not asked, nobody else is aspecting her. She's going to finish Leo without applying it to anybody else. So this says it right here. The emptying of the courses of, if a planet would be separated from the conjunction, and remember when they say conjunction, it means any aspect of another planet by bodily conjunction or aspect. Remember, conjunction just means aspect, and it would not be joined to another so long as it were in that same sign. That's the example. So let's look at those 2, and then look at returning. Okay, and then so we'll continue with these, and then we'll go from that to, or we might even leave pushing and that other stuff for the next time, because that's a whole conversation on reception, which maybe might be a good thing to talk about today to start with. Okay, let's look at this return of virtue. And this is something new to me. This is something kind of new to me that I didn't really know. So there's 2 types of returning. So ultimately, what it basically means is a planet returns its virtue. And it's one thing that, let me get this organized for myself. So a planet can push virtue or push nature, or it can return its nature or virtue. When a planet pushes its nature, it usually is in a sign, and it's applying to another planet that rules that sign. So for instance, I have the sun in Capricorn applying to the sextile of Saturn in Pisces. Saturn rules Capricorn. That's called pushing nature. Now, if Saturn were either retrograde or combust, Saturn would have to return his virtue because he would not be able to handle what was being pushed on him. In this returning, sometimes useful, sometimes not useful. Returning is when, with one star being placed under the sun, another one applies to it. But since the first one is burdened by the sun, it returns to the other what another is unable to keep. So once again, we can't use my example. Let's use this one. If Mars is in Capricorn, applying to Saturn in Pisces, Saturn is at 12 Pisces, Sun is at, I'll write it in. Mars is at 10 Capricorn. Saturn is at 12 Pisces. Sun, 13 Pisces. By virtue of this, Mars would be, because Mars is in the sign that's ruled by Capricorn, if Saturn were not, ruled by Saturn rather, if Saturn were not combust, this would be a classic reception that's called pushing nature. And this is one of the 16 that we'll get to and talk about. It would be called pushing nature because Mars would push, as a result of being in the sign of the ruler that he's applying to, Mars would push his nature and the sign's nature onto that planet. However, Saturn is combust, so he cannot accept it. And so he returns it. So that's the return. So that's a perfect example of return. There's two ways that that can happen. It either happens when the planet is retrograde or when the planet is combust. And so now when we think about retrograde planets, right? Because there are always questions about, well, what does retrograde mean? A retrograde. So now we know that when a planet is applying to a retrograde planet, it essentially returns its nature. And one of the things that people talk about in horary is when you're asking about something that's been lost, if the planet that signifies the thing being lost is retrograde, it means it's coming back to you. Okay, Diana, thanks for coming. Excellent. So yeah, if you have to go, whatever, that's totally fine. We've got about 30 minutes more that we'll kind of deal with this. And of course, the video will be available within the next few days. Okay, so I think I'd rather talk about this type of fitness, return with fitness and return with detriment at another time. But let's go ahead and just see if we can just kind of find either return or prohibition or emptiness of course, right, in the chart, or that's something we can look for. And then we'll do that in a second. Let's start our conversation about reception. And we'll continue it next time as well, because it will be an ongoing conversation. Now, in order to understand reception, you need to really strongly understand essential dignity, right? So essential dignity means, remember, there are the 5 different essential dignities, but the main dignities we're wondering about or we're working with when we talk about reception is domain and exaltation, or domicile and exaltation. Right? And so the domiciles of the planets, let's write those out, because I'm sure you all, for the most part, know them, but just to kind of get, so if we use the moon, so she rules Cancer, and she's exalted in Taurus. The sun rules Leo and is exalted in Aries, etc. Right? So Mercury, he's got Gemini and Virgo. Let's just use those 3 planets for right now. And he's exalted in Virgo. Okay, so let's just use those 3 planets right now. Let's say, what if the moon were at 3 degrees of Gemini and Mercury were at 3 degrees or 5 degrees of Libra, then there's a reception between the moon and Mercury, because the moon is in the sign that's ruled by Mercury. So Mercury will receive the moon. And this is called pushing nature. And this is actually one of the, like I said, so we do course returning, then we come to pushing power, and pushing management, and so pushing that power and pushing management, basically. But pushing nature is an aspect of pushing power. So as we can see here, there are 4 things that can be pushed. And this is all a part of reception, right? So it's all about basically reception. And matter of fact, I remember I wrote down something that I thought was important, that the thing about reception is that reception helps to make things happen. Yes, the first and most important thing that reception does is guarantee perfection of a matter. Okay, so that's the most important thing to think about, is that it guarantees perfection. It guarantees that the thing is going to come to pass because it makes the aspect stronger. It makes the aspect stronger. And so if you can see here, let's see what I wrote. Okay. The different types of reception, 2 types of reception by connection. Okay, so I kind of went way into this reception thing here. Good. Okay, pushing management, we'll talk about that in a section, but the reception by connection. So a classic reception is pushing nature. when planet A is in the sign of planet B and applies to planet B. Whenever we talk about anything pushing, we're always talking about an applying aspect. So pushing nature is when a planet is in the sign of another planet and it is applying to that planet. And so here we have Venus is in Sagittarius, applying to Jupiter in Aquarius. So Venus is pushing nature onto Jupiter. That's pushing nature. Now, then we have what's called a reverse reception. This is the classic reception, which is pushing nature. Then we have the reverse reception which is when planet A is in the sign, and when planet A is applying to a planet in their sign. So in this particular case, Venus is in Sagittarius and she's applying to Mars in Libra. She's not applying to Jupiter, right? Which we had here. This is the reception, the pushing nature, the classic reception is where Venus is in Jupiter's sign and applies to Jupiter. Here, Venus is in Jupiter's sign, but she's applying to a planet in her sign. So those are the classic receptions. So let's just break that down for a second and look at a chart and see if we can find either of these two. So we're looking for either the classic reception, where a planet is in a sign and they are applying to a planet that rules that sign, or when a planet is in a sign and they are applying to a planet in a sign that they rule. Okay. Okay, we've got some reception going on here. And we've got classic pushing nature. We have a classic pushing nature reception. The moon is in Gemini at 2 degrees of Gemini. Mercury is the ruler of Gemini. Mercury is at 3 degrees of Pisces. The moon is applying to the square of Mercury. That is classic pushing nature reception. Perfect example. Is there anywhere where a planet is aspecting? See, we could have had, now if we did the opposite, look at this. Actually, if Jupiter were at 3 and Mercury were at 0, then we would also have a pushing nature classic reception between Mercury and Jupiter, because Jupiter, we would have the other one. Right? So the classic one is a planet is in a sign applying to the ruler of that sign. The opposite or reverse is a planet is in a sign and it's applying to a planet that's in their sign. So those are both, unfortunately, this is not applying, or we'd have perfect examples, but you can see what I'm talking about. Classic example, pushing nature, moon to Mercury. Reverse example, if it were applying, would be Mercury to Jupiter. Anything else in this one that's kind of doing it? So there's three types of pushing. There is pushing nature, which we've just talked about, which is when a planet is in the sign ruled by another planet and is applying to that planet. Then there's something called pushing power. And that's when a planet is in its own dignity and it's applying to any planet. And then it pushes its power onto that planet. In this particular case, Venus, because she's faster than the sun, is pushing power to the sun. Now, of course, she's being combusted by him, but this is an example of pushing power. So the planets that can push in this chart really is only Venus, right? Because even though Saturn is in his own sign, he can't apply to any of the other classical planets. Only applying aspects can be pushed. So pushing can only happen when there's an application. So Venus, if Venus were at 11 and Saturn here were at 12, Venus could push her power onto Saturn. And so think of it as, it's almost like a system of of patronage. These receptions are like systems of patronage where the planet then takes on or vouches for the other planet. So in this particular case, Mercury is going to vouch for the moon. And when Mercury was at a lower degree than Jupiter, when they were both at 0, then Jupiter was vouching for Mercury, right? And the moon and Venus is going to vouch for the sun, even though she can't really because she's being combusted, right? So she would have to return her nature. So that means, remember, any planet that we're trying to apply to her would have their nature return because she's in. So we've got all of this stuff in it now, almost all of it. I mean, it's not, textbook, but we've got the potential for everything we've just talked about, except for prohibition. Oh, if the moon were here and Jupiter were here, if the moon were at 0, Jupiter were at 2, and Mars were at 1, that would be our prohibition. Or maybe not, because the moon's so fast, she might get in there before Mars gets to him. But if Mars were at 207 and Jupiter were at 209, like if Jupiter were here instead of the moon, and Mars were at 2 degrees of 7 minutes, then the Mars would prohibit the moon. Let's look and see what else we've got as far as reception is concerned. So remember, it's got to be an applying aspect. And okay, we've got a very close separation between Venus and Mars, right? But let's say Venus were at 503. She would then be pushing nature to Mars, right? Because she's in his sign. She would be applying to Mars, who rules Scorpio. As it is, they're just finishing their connection. They're in a recent disregard. Let's put it that way, a very recent disregard. But it's a little wide. It's a little bit too wide, but she will be applying to Jupiter, and he's in the sign of her exaltation. So that would be the other kind of the opposite of the classic reception, the reverse reception, where she's applying to a planet in a sign where she has dignity. Another aspect would be here. This is actually the perfect pushing. The sun is applying to Jupiter. The sun is in Sagittarius, applying to Jupiter in Pisces. The sun is pushing nature to Jupiter, and essentially Jupiter would be pushing power if he were obviously able to apply, but we can say he receives him. He's definitely receiving him very, very well. So this reception between the sun and Jupiter is important. This is classic pushing nature reception. If Jupiter were at 11, he would be pushing power to Saturn, right? Because Saturn's at 12, Jupiter's at 14. They're disregarding, or they're finished with each other. But if Jupiter wasn't, if he were at 11, then he'd be pushing his power onto Saturn, just like the sun is pushing his nature onto Jupiter. So there's some more classic reception there. There's another one. Oh, so what we have here, this one here, what we have here is Mars pushing his nature onto Saturn. Mars is pushing his power onto Saturn, right? But he's also pushing nature because, he's also pushing nature, but he's also being received doubly because Capricorn is his exaltation. So he's pushing power, and then he's receiving his exaltation from Saturn. This feels kind of like a workaholic chart, and like a chart, not maybe like a workaholic chart, but also feels like the relation. I would wonder if Moonflower is working, or it finds herself in work relationships with significant others, because this is a very no business. This whole 7th, 10th thing is very all business, no sentimentality, all business. So this Mars, Mars in Aries is, get it, go for it. It's not sentiment. There's very little sentiment in relation with the Saturn and the Mars here, which I think is very interesting. So that's a great example of this. This is pushing power, right? We were talking about pushing nature already. This is pushing power. And same thing here. Jupiter is pushing power onto Saturn because he's applying and he's in his exaltation. So there's a lot of heavy hitting stuff going on in this chart. Jupiter pushing power, Mars pushing power, both to Saturn. Doesn't make it, I don't think it makes it particularly pleasant. Probably this person's educational life was probably very rigorous and difficult and stressful, but they probably did finish it. Okay, so that's more reception with that. The other one, let's look at this one. Venus and Mars. This is the classic reverse reception. Venus is applying to a planet in her sign. Venus is in Leo, applying to Mars in Libra. She's not applying to the sun. She's applying to Mars, who's in her sign. She's not applying to the ruler of her sign. She's not applying to the ruler of Leo. She's applying to a planet who is in her sign. And then we have Saturn in his sign that's obviously receiving all of these other people. But look what we have here. Mars is in Libra, going to the aspect of Saturn. So Mars is pushing nature, and Saturn will receive him from his dignity of exaltation, while he himself is in his own sign. So what you can see from that is that one, planets that receive any kind of push, right? If they receive a pushing nature like this, Mars is pushing his nature onto Saturn. It helps that other planet. It helps both of them, but it's especially helping Saturn, right? And also remember that Mars is translating the light to Saturn. So this Saturn is really being helped by this trine from Mars, both because it's from his exaltation, and two, because it's bringing a benefic influence to him as well. And Saturn represents the 4th and the 5th house, so that would be helpful for children, right? Because Saturn in the 5th for children is not necessarily a very good thing, right? So that would be helpful. That would be a helpful thing for children. And also the fact that Saturn is opposing the ruler of the 5th is opposing. Remember, we're asking, the very first question we asked is, can I have children? Will I be able to have children? That was our hypothetical. And so that's actually pertinent to the Renaissance chart, because Saturn in the 5th can delay, it can create obstacles to children, but Saturn is in his own sign, which should produce it. However, Saturn is also opposing Venus, which is the ruler of the ascendant. So that means the ruler of the 5th opposes the ruler of the 1st. So that means that once again, there should be obstacles and problems. And it could also mean that once the child is born, there's difficulties between them, right? Because the 5th house represents your fertility and ability to have children, but then it also represents the child and the life of the child once the child is born. Now, this chart may have more problems with having children. And the reason I say so is because both the ruler of the ascendant and the moon are in a sterile sign. Saturn is in the 5th. The part of fortune and the sun are in sterile signs. So there should definitely be some challenge in relation to having children in this particular chart. And then less. And why did I come to that? Oh, because we were talking, and also remember, this goes back to what we were talking about with what's advancing, what is retreating. What's advancing? Saturn is one of the planets that's advancing. He's the ruler of the 5th. Venus is one of the planets that's advancing. She's the ruler of the 1st. The moon is the co-ruler of everything. It's advancing. So we know already that this opposition. So sometimes we wonder, well, which aspect is more important? Which aspect is more important than another? We know this aspect is really important, this opposition, and this one. We know that this system, Venus, Mars, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Saturn, these are the most important systems in this chart because of this. Okay. Okay, Ramey's rule. So we're looking for reception. We're just looking for, so we're kind of just picking apart our issue with reception. So what we have here is, remember, only the pushing planet can, only the applying planet can push. We have Mars applying to a planet we have Mars applying to a planet that's in its own exaltation, which should be good. Now, one of the things we haven't talked about yet is what I call negative reception. Negative reception or mixed reception. Now, this could be good for Mars, but it isn't, because Mars is in Virgo, which is the detriment of Jupiter. Jupiter rules Pisces. Virgo is the opposite of Pisces. And Jupiter is in Cancer, which is the fall of Mars. Mars is exalted in Capricorn and fallen in Cancer. So this particular sextile between Mars and Jupiter is a negative reception, what I call a negative reception. And so it will bring them together, but it won't bring them together for good. And so, and do you remember a long while ago, we were talking about reception and aspects and things of this nature. And we looked at charts of some people who had some really big physical problems. And we noticed that there were easy aspects between them, and that there was also negative reception. So if the planet, let's say, and it was to the ruler of the first. So the ruler of the first was, I think in both cases, was in fall and retrograde. And then it was also receiving, I remember one of them was receiving a trine from Venus, and the other one was receiving a sextile from Saturn or Jupiter or something. And both of those planets were in the sign of either their fall or detriment. So not only were they themselves detrimented, but they were being given detriment by the other planet that they were in aspect to. This isn't necessarily the same thing. This Jupiter is quite strong. It's being given detriment by Mars. That means whenever Mars and Jupiter connections happen, so for instance, in this case, the 10th house is Mars and Jupiter in this case, right? Because Pisces is on the midheaven and Aries is intercepted. But if we used it whole sign, Aries would be on the 11th. So that could mean that friends and work, that, we get along, but that it's not quite as beneficial, or work friends aren't quite as beneficial to us as we'd like them to be. Work is good, but work friends aren't quite as beneficial to don't help us to get forward as much, don't support us as much as we might want to. It could be something like that. Where else do we have Mars? Mars is the ruler of the 5th and the 6th. So the 5th house is children, the 6th house is money, is the child's money. So if this is the 5th house, then the 6th house, 5th house is the first house of the child. The 6th house is the second house of the child, the second from the 5th. So this could be the child's money. So if this person has a child, this person has a child, the issue between money, it might be, well, the issue between money, it won't be terrible, obviously, because this means that the person may have a lot of money, but they might be a little bit too liberal with it. Mars is very rash and doesn't think before they act. And so this person may end up having a child who has quite a bit of money, but doesn't really take care of it so well. But has a lot of good access to money, can make a lot of money. I always say there's different kind of charts. There's money holding charts, there's money making charts, and then there's money keeping charts. Not all charts that make money are charts that keep money. And so we might find that this person ends up having a child who can't keep their money, if they have children at all, right? I think this is one of the people in the thing that does not have children. And once again, ruler of the 5th is in a sterile sign. All these things are fertile, actually, though, so maybe not. But I know that was one of the things I was looking for in my study. I'm going to open it to questions. I'm going to stop there because I know we went through a lot of information, and I'm going to open it up to any questions that you might have. Period. On anything that we've just done. So Camilo, I think you're totally new. Are you? Is that correct? Oh, okay. Well, if you're totally new, it looks like you've stuck around for the whole thing. It doesn't seem like you've been asking questions or been wondering what the hell's going on or what I'm talking about. So that's really a good thing. And Louise, do you have any questions of any kind? I know you tend to be quite quiet, but if you've got anything going on, this is the time to do it.
Trying to be quiet. Thank you. Yeah. I'm trying to wrap my head around again. You know, you explained when you just 1 sec, because I
Yeah.
had this.
Do
I think
you
I
want to
got
do you want to
this,
formulate
yeah,
it?
just-
Do you want to
yeah,
formulate it?
I'll write
Okay,
it. Because
formulate it and write it.
It was when you had you had a slide where you showed that you had one planet that was in domicile, but the opposite was also in they had like a square, or they could have an opposition. Yeah, but they were, there was also in domicile, and the energies there. It was, you showed me that. I was quite.
Was that today? Was that today that
Yeah,
we
it
saw?
was. It was.
It was one of these.
Yeah,
Okay, hold on a second. Let me see.
yeah. It was. I think it was the Venus one, and the It wasn't the Venus Saturn one. It was the I think it was the Jupiter one.
Here, I'm gonna share the screen again, and then you can tell me which one you think it might have been. Okay, so we start with, here's Ramey's world.
Yeah, was it there? I think, wasn't it?
Here is the one where we had.
Yeah. That's the one.
This one.
That's the one exactly. Yeah.
This is the one. Okay, so what was do you have a question about this one, or what were you?
Yeah, because what exactly happens when when the two opposite, not just the opposition, but also the energies in the signs, what happens there?
Ah, good question. Okay, so so remember when I was just talking about this, we were talking about what is advancing, right? So just kind of looking at what's advancing based on these being in the succeeding houses, we know that this is going to be a somewhat important opposition, right?
Yeah.
And then, and I see, and the reason I was talking about the signs is, if you remember when we did our stuff on signs, one of the characteristics of signs is that there are fertile signs and there are sterile signs.
Yeah, the hot and dry.
That's very good, excellent. And the Gemini signs, and the Gemini signs. Right, very good, very good. And so this particular chart kind of screams out problems with childhood, problems with bearing children, because Saturn is already obstacles and slows things down, right? But Saturn is in his own sign. So based on what we know about that, we know that when a planet is in its own sign and house, it usually can produce for that house. So even though it's Saturn, we could pretty much say, hey, you may have to wait. It may be stop and go. You might have some obstacles here and there, but you should be able to have a kid. Maybe, right?
Because it's in the same, it's in Aquarius. Yeah.
Which is right. So that's remember, right? Yeah. And remember, exactly, that's home. So, but then again, we know that oppositions make things difficult. Right? The opposition has the character of Saturn, right? Remember when we did all this stuff about the aspects, each aspect has the character of a planet. So we know already we've got Saturn in the 5th creating an obstacle or slowing the progress down. Then he's retrograde, right? Which means he's going to be unpredictable. Then he's opposing the ruler of the 1st, which represents our body, me, which represents me. So that creates a person that creates an immediate situation between me and the 5th house issue.
Yeah, he's opposed the 11th house.
Exactly. And then that stuff's in Leo, which is sterile. So we know that and also Moon, which is co-ruler of everything and mediatrix. So we know that there's going to be obstacles and difficulties in having children. I won't say that they won't be able to have it, because based on
because it's in
this,
Aquarius. Yeah.
yeah, one, because it's an Aquarius, and two, because I think based on this, I think they might have one child. They might be able to have one child,
But yeah.
but there should be a challenge and a difficulty and an obstacle around it, and that's where I was going with the issue around the opposition and the signs. Did that answer your question, or what were you trying to get?
Yeah, just one sec. I'm at this. Um, but what sign is, because it's opposite, it's opposite, it's opposite the moon, it's opposite the moon. Saturn is opposite the moon there in
Yes,
this
yes.
plot. And what zodiac is it in? I can't see that. It's in
What is it in? I'm sorry.
no, yeah, what sign is it in?
Oh, the moon is in Leo.
But I can't.
Well, no,
Oh, up there.
rules,
Sorry,
moon
it's
rules,
just not.
moon
I
rules
thought it was the
Cancer.
north node. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, moon rules
Okay.
Cancer, but she's conjuncting the Venus in Leo. So that's the other reason why. If you remember when we looked at fertility, Bonatti
Yeah.
had that technique where you looked at planets in the first, 10th, 11th, or 7th. And the planets that said yes for children were Jupiter, Venus, the moon, and Mercury. And the planets that said no for children were Mars and Saturn and the sun. And so here we've got Jupiter in the first, we've got Venus and Saturn in the first, Venus and Sun in the first, but we've got the Saturn in the fifth. So to me, this says that, yeah, probably the person can have children. It's there, but they do need to go through some kind of disappointment and difficulty and obstacle before it happens. Yeah.
Okay, because it's very hot, and you can say it's very hot there. It's because it's in Leo.
Yeah,
And
well,
then,
partially because of that, definitely. I mean, well, partially because anything opposing Saturn is impeded.
yeah, and I know that from the also when I study my own sign, or my own chart, yeah.
Right.
And but it's also, I was thinking, well, because the moon also makes a square down to I don't know, that's the north
Pluto.
node down there.
To the
Would that
Pluto.
be, would that have an influence?
I mean,
And Pluto,
sure.
yeah, or yeah.
But it's not to because the nodes are at 6, the moon's at 21, so there's no aspect between the moon and the nodes. It's really more the moon is applying to the sextile of Mars. It's applying to the opposition of Saturn, the square of Pluto and the opposition of Saturn. So already all of that is kind of difficult. All of that's all of that, I mean, think about it. It's Mars, it's Pluto, it's Saturn, and it's Pluto by square, it's Saturn by opposition. So you can feel that, right? You can feel kind of the difficulty, the stress and the difficulty around it, and the upheaval.
Yeah, because, okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's
interesting.
Yeah. So that's the way to look at it, in my opinion, is kind of through that lens. It's good that you focused on the moon that way, because the moon really kind of tells us what's happening, what's kind of going on, what's coming forward, once again, what's perfecting, right? What's taking place. So that's part of. So remember, this whole thing is about what either comes to pass or is prohibited from coming to pass. So with this Venus moon opposing Saturn, that's a possible prohibition, right?
Okay, yeah.
That's a possible prohibition, but we've got some mitigating factors that maybe could make it happen, in my opinion.
And
I think, good, I'm sorry.
But that's mainly because Saturn is back in Aquarius, or will there be?
And the trine from Jupiter to Saturn.
Oh, there. Okay.
That, see, remember, that's what I'm saying. So this and this is the most, so these, the opposition and the trines here are the most important. The opposition is where we know there's going to be problem. The trine is where we can see a possible alleviation.
Yeah, I understand, but I'm just curious because the moon, could it just one silly question more, could it create more problems because it's because it's where it's basically is you know, that it will, that would extend the waiting period and the time before something actually happens. You know, there was also a, you know, that's, isn't that Venus there also?
Venus, yes, and yes, it can. Yes, I mean, absolutely. That's my point, is that that's what Saturn does, right? He slows it down, he delays, he obstructs, he delays, he slows things. So yes, absolutely, all of those things that you're asking are exactly what can happen. But you're asking if the moon can make that happen. Is that correct?
Yeah. I'm wondering. I'm just wondering that because of the placement where it is, and also because it's so close to Venus. I don't know.
Well, first of all, kind of try to kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Try to kind of figure out exactly what everything is about, right? So if we're talking about the, I see what you're talking about. So, I think I see what you're getting at. Because the moon is translating from Venus to Saturn. Is that what you're saying? Or from Venus to, because the Saturn is going to collect. So here's another collection. So so Saturn is going to collect Jupiter, Venus, Mars, and and once the moon gets to it, he's going to collect all of those people. And so, yes, I think it could make it more acute, but I think it could make it more acute that we wait and then it happens. Or it's disappointment and then eureka. It's disappointment, then eureka, because Saturn does collect. The ruler of the fifth does end up collecting.
And okay, I understand now. So because it's a difficult, the opposition is very difficult, but it will happen at some stage. Okay.
Hold on 1 second.
Yeah.
1 minute. I've got to stop the share for 1 second. I'm having some problems with the ProCam. Okay, select the speaker. Perfect. Okay. Okay, where were we? What were we just talking about? Oh,
because so what you're basically saying, that because it's in the opposition to Saturn, it will happen at some stage. It's at some point.
No. What I'm saying is that the opposition to Saturn guarantees an obstacle and a challenge. The trine from Jupiter is what I think will allow it to happen. So I think that's my point. So my point is that this opposition that the moon makes even more acute, right? Because the moon is leaving Venus and going to Saturn at some point. Well, she's going to Mars and then to Saturn. So as a result, moon is going to Mars first, which is money, which is the ruler of the second, and then she's going to the ruler of the fifth by opposition. She's going to translate, and he's going to collect everybody else. But that says to me that, especially since Mars is translating Jupiter, who's a benefic planet, in Saturn's exaltation of Libra, Mars is actually translating the light between Jupiter and Saturn. And Jupiter is going to, and moon is going to finally come to Saturn, and Saturn will collect. So Saturn's getting the translation from Mars, and he will collect all of the light at the same time. So it's because of the translation and because of the collection and because of the trines that I think, yes, the person will have children.
Okay, I understand now. Yeah.
And actually, I'm glad that we've gone through this, because because now can you see what I mean by how these terms create a narrative?
God damn it. Oh, good. Okay. Yeah. So all of a sudden there's a narrative, and the narrative that we have, what does that keep doing that? Oh, I know why. Okay.
I don't know what's happening. I don't know what's going on.
There we go. Yeah, no, it's me.
Yeah.
It was my computer. Sorry about that. Yeah, so that's this issue of narrative that I'm talking about. Especially when we get into something like besiegement. We're going to continue with this because we've still got a few other things to look at. We've actually covered quite a bit, but we have a few other things to look at with this before we go on to the next one, which is about the moon. But this is good. But I feel like you get it, Annalise. You're not off. You're not off. You're definitely on it. It's just knowing exactly what it is I'm talking about, what I'm using as my delineation. The reason that I'm saying that it's obvious that there's going to be problems. The opposition shows us that there's obvious it's going to be problems, but there's an alleviation coming from the trine. And so it looks like a problem with an alleviation.
Okay. Yeah. That's interesting. But will you continue next time with the what's, I need to go back. Yeah, I just need my the you know, the waxing and the warning aspects.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, we will continue to pound that in. You know,
Okay.
just that's something you want to kind of get more familiar with and get more comfortable with.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Because of course we've gone through, you know, where the ruler, you know, in which in several times we've gone through, you know, in which the planetary I just need to, sorry, it's very late.
The dignity?
And I haven't spoken. I haven't been back in the UK for a couple of years.
Oh.
I'm educated in the UK, but it's a couple of years.
Is Auf Deutsch better? Is Auf Deutsch besser?
Ambition.
Okay.
No. But in what not rule, in what you know, in the power and the
the dignity,
yeah,
the essential dignity. So this is what I would do in order to kind of to prepare yourself for next week and for generally. What I would work on memorizing is the fastest to slowest, right? So Moon to Saturn, fastest to slowest, or the Chaldean order, which is slowest to fastest. And then also memorize what signs the planets rule and where they're exalted. If you can get that stuff to where you absolutely know it, if you can get to where you know that with no